Scarlett's compared with Ferrari and Red Bull, no rake as such on the Mercedes, but a lot of effort now going into rear tyre temperature management.
Yeah, a few changes to the Mercedes. It's strange. Throughout the year, they've not made many changes to the car, and that's quite unusual for Mercedes. They normally bring one or two big updates. This year, they seem to have been focusing on the car's setup. We know it's basically very quick, but it's not had to be able to get the most out of it every race. So some
and
of these
small operating windows as well.
Exactly. So some of these changes are just about getting the car to work the way they want it, rather than it being big changes. First of all, front wing, introduced at Spa. Both of these updates we're about to speak to are at Spa. Their front wing hasn't changed much, almost for several seasons in some respects. It's a concept that works for them. They've been multiplying it. And what they've done is they've changed some aspects of the front wing end plate and what they call the flag vanes, these sort of R-shaped vanes on the front wing. So we've got the original ones here. If we throw those away and put the new ones in, you can just see that the end plate is just ever so slightly different, and they've got much bigger vane creating the outwash. And then the other big change is the doubling up of these, what they call the flag vanes again, slightly inboard. And again, this is the stuff that we talk about week in, week out, all about outwash, getting that front tyre wake away from the rear bodywork of the car, so the rear aero of the car works much more efficiently.
But why didn't they do this 2 years ago then, when they first came out with that basic spec?
Well, what we found, aerodynamics is no surfaces are really new, but they're just splitting them up into more and more individual surfaces to create this sort of micro aerodynamics, which is very much the feature of the current sport. Next year, all of these bits will be thrown away. You're going to have a much simpler front wing. So this really is kind of the final swan song of the very complicated front wings that we've seen. So smallest change there. Then we've got the more important and more interesting change at the back of the car. If we go back and have a look at the rear wheels, they've run rear wheels pretty much, again, the same sort of shape on the rim and the spokes, and they've had this knurled surface inside for many years now, which helps transfer heat from the brakes into the tyre. And teams tune this. So some races they want more rear tyre heat, some races they want less rear tyre heat, depending on how the chassis, the circuit, and the conditions are working. Normally what you get is lots of heat from the brake comes out through the wheel, through the sort of the tunnel of the rim, and then goes out behind the car. And when you've got too much rear tyre heat, you want to just get rid of that heat. You want it nowhere near the wheel, so you have a nice smooth surface that doesn't absorb the heat. What Mercedes have done is follow what Red Bull and lots of other teams have been starting to do by putting heatsink fins into the shape, and you can see them now coming up on the wheel. And these help increase the surface area of the wheel, which grabs this brake heat, and that then transfers into the wheel rim, therefore into the carcass of the tyre, which gives you more rear tyre heat, which means that the tyres don't slip as much, which means you're reducing blisters. And certainly at Monza, we saw that Mercedes were very good with their tyre management, particularly on those soft tyres, which were prone to slip, overheating, and through the race. It's probably one of the things that helped Hamilton gain that win by looking after his tyres so well. We come up to Singapore, something like this. It's a tunable thing. You can choose to run a simple wheel or the finned wheel. Probably for Singapore, we may see that Mercedes get rid of this because we know that they've got too much tyre temperature in the heat and the tight corners of Singapore. So we'll keep an eye on how this develops through the balance.
And this is not to be confused with the blown wheel nut concept that we've been seeing, particularly on the Red Bulls at the front.
No, so the blown front axle, the blown wheel nut as I call it, which is a cheeky term, is an aerodynamic thing, and it's to do with the front wing about outwash. But there is still heat transfer going from the front brakes into the wheel, and teams change the drums and the blanking around that area to either absorb more or less heat into the wheel. This is something they tune throughout the weekend, and obviously they plan ahead for Grand Prix, knowing what they expect the temperatures to be like and how the car will suit it. So all of the teams are playing with these areas, so they're changing the ducting and the wheel specifications to suit their requirements.
Well, Mercedes historically not quick in Singapore. It'll be really interesting to see whether this gives them some sort of scope now in terms of managing the tyre temperatures and getting the car to work.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Mercedes have been able to change what's always been their bugbear around Singapore and get a result in this year.